Thank you, Brenda, for joining us. I will let everybody know a little bit more about Brenda. Brenda is a credentialed dementia specialist and Forbes Health Advisory Board member 2022. She is the founder of Big Growth Dementia Education, working with families and senior living providers, and she regularly presents for the Alzheimer's Association. Brenda offers also empowering practical insights, always with the goal of to improve meaningful connections with people living with dementia. She holds a number of dementia certifications and has served in senior living for over 12 years. She advocates for inclusive spaces and voices, and I am so delighted to have Brenda joining us. She lives in Colorado, but she used to live in the Seattle area, so her connection to the Pacific Northwest is great, and we are so delighted to have you here, Brenda, and presenting for us on how to join on their journey during dementia.
Sandra, it's lovely to be with you. And hello, everybody on the call. As we go through today, if you have questions or something really gets you excited, or if something isn't quite clear, by all means, put it in the chat. And we'll also have time for questions after. I'm going to put in the chat right now, so you have it. I also built or designed a worksheet that you can use as we go along, if that's the way your brain works. And Sandra will also send it out, like she said, as well as the slides after. So let me pull that up. Okay. Good. Okay, so it should be in the chat. Okay. So today's topic is joining their journey. And this is one of my favorite workshops to present because for some of us, it can be a real mental shift in something we practice. But this can absolutely transform your relationship with your loved one who has memory loss, who has mild cognitive impairment, who has a form of dementia, kind of along that spectrum. So we will dive in. Today, we're going to cover dementia and time. So if your loved one, wherever they're at on that spectrum, if they have some memory loss, if they have dementia, somewhere in between, there's often a shift in how they perceive time and where they're comfortable in time. So we'll talk about that. We're going to spend the bulk of our time in the next three sections: sundowning, exit seeking, and wandering. We'll sort of conclude and then go through some Q&A. And of course, I want everybody to feel comfortable. This is a safe and inclusive, welcoming space. My pronouns are she, hers. So Sandra already discussed my background and expertise. So let's talk about dementia and time. So very often, not always, very often, in the dementia journey or early in memory loss, individuals may see themselves, may feel more rooted in an early time of their life. So if somebody is on a dementia journey, often their short-term memories aren't able to get, I like to call it, kind of filed away in the brain, like processed by the brain and stored. So often in this journey, it's the earlier memories that really remain firm and are stored in the brain. So I think about that and how our loved ones may feel comfortable in an earlier period of their time, of their life. It could be way early, say in their 20s, 30s, etc., or it could just be more recently. And really the crux of this whole workshop is this bolded piece. When we join, quote unquote, our loved one, we connect with them. So you've probably heard of joining, maybe if you've been familiar with people or have had other people in your life on this dementia journey, or you'll see it in other fields as well. In individuals with autism, you'll see this as a great way to connect. The opposite of joining is if we try to try to place our loved one in our time and our reality, even though I believe firmly that that is the true reality. If I try to force them in it, that is definitely where we're going to break connection. So joining builds connection, convincing does not. I'm sure some of you have seen this. I know Sandra has. There's this amazing art show. It sort of cycles through social media periodically. And it's Tom Hussey. It's called Reflections of the Past. I think it's just so powerful. You'll see in the three images I picked, there is the person as you and I would see them today. And then in the reflection, how they see themselves or where they are most rooted. So I just want to pause on this for just a sec. If you're thinking of your loved one right now, think about how they may see themselves. Do they feel more rooted? Let's say they're in their 80s. They feel more rooted in that time. If they're living with you, if you're going to help them or you have home care or they live at a gen care community, where do they seem to feel most rooted in how they see themselves? So I think about when I worked in communities, and sometimes there would be residents who would see themselves as a worker in the community and not as a resident. People who live at home maybe kind of get anxious in the late afternoon and thinking, oh, I got to get out of here. I got to go pick up my kids from school, but maybe they're in their 70s. So I think this art show really gives us a visceral feeling of where our loved one may be. I want to give a little bit more on joining. I'm sure many of you have seen the Brene Brown video on empathy, and I didn't include the link, but I'm sure you can find it. It is a great resource for all of us, and also in this memory loss or dementia journey. So ways to join. One, you want to engage with your loved one. Two, you want to mirror their emotions. And I'll say something about that in a sec. And three, you want to respond with empathy. I like to also kind of like build it further, and we'll talk about that more in a few slides. Respond with empathy. I like to think of it as no matter what my reality is, I'm going to respond with empathy, respond as if what my loved one is saying is true. So if they think they need to get home and be ready for the kids when they come home, I'm going to respond in a way that is true. And it's not lying, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. Mirroring their emotions. I don't know about you all, but for me, sometimes that can be a little scary. You know, maybe my loved one is on this memory loss or dementia journey, and they come to me angry. I remember with a particular resident, this really being an aha for me. And she was angry, angry, angry. And I wanted to de-escalate her, but I did it too fast. I was so focused on de-escalating that I didn't mirror. I didn't engage with her. I didn't respond as if her reality were truth. And she immediately reprimanded me. She said, "You never believe me." And I thought, oh, I totally missed the boat here. So responding with empathy, mirroring their emotions. We've all had a day. I know Sandra and I have. I'll call Sandra and say, "Oh, I just had the worst day, Sandra. Work was hard. My spouse was driving me crazy. I'm just so frustrated." And if Sandra empathizes with me, mirrors with me, I'm going to feel more connected with her. But if she immediately says, "Don't worry about it. Your spouse is a piece of work." If she immediately tries to solve, I'm going to feel a disconnect. Right, Sandra? Yeah. So 2 really good tips. I'm encouraging you to put them in your pocket. And I hope if you have a dress, I hope it has pockets. So your loved one says something. One thing you can respond with is, "Tell me more. Tell me more about that." So a loved one comes to me and says, "Oh, I need my mom. I'm looking for my mom." I say, "Tell me about your mom," because I just want to draw. I want to connect. I don't want to try to solve. Actually, in that moment, I don't even know where she's at in her journey. I only know the words I'm hearing. but those words may mean something differently for her. And we'll talk more about that. And then could you show me? This one is especially great if your loved one has some speaking or verbal deficits. So for example, whether or not your loved one is on this journey, they may have something similar to primary progressive aphasia, which is what we see in as a type of frontal temporal dementia. And I'm not saying this is your loved one, but just giving you an example. With primary progressive aphasia, sometimes it's the case where our loved one has the words but can't speak them. It comes out as sort of a garble. And so I want to still join. I want to have empathy. I want to mirror, but I don't know what he's saying or what they're saying. So I say, could you show me? And so that way, often they can point or sort of gesture or push their jacket, give me some further sense if I'm not understanding the words I'm hearing. So tell me about that. Could you show me? So the three topics that I picked for sort of our bulk, sundowning, exit seeking, wandering. I picked those for this workshop because they tend to be some of those actions that our loved ones may take that I think alarm us a lot. Like, what am I supposed to do here? How am I supposed to react to this? How do I make this better? So I want to give you some tools. So sundowning, if you haven't heard of it, and your loved one may or may not be experiencing it, does not always happen on the dementia journey, but it's very common. And it can be described as an increase in confusion, anxiety, agitation, just sort of a amping up is a good way to think of it. Often in the late afternoon, evening, kind of dusk. I know for where you all are, where I am, Pacific Northwest, Colorado, dusk sure changes a lot over the year. So it isn't necessarily a set time for us, but you might think about it as sort of the time of day that things shift over. So whether it's light changing to dusk and dark, whether it's kind of the traditional time that our loved one went to work, came home from work, went to work if they worked the night shift, something like that. But it's kind of that shift of day. And this can really be a significant issue for a loved one and for us. It can show as dramatic changes in energy, in emotion, in sort of mental state. And so I want to share some things that may be helpful in diminishing those sundowning episodes. And some of what I'll share both here and in the other parts is us being proactive, us looking for trends for our loved one. Like, gosh, it seems like they always experience this, not so much time, but by when it gets dark. Or gosh, they always seem to experience this, or it gets worse when this happens, or it's better when this happens. So we're going to talk through ways that you can observe and look for trends and clues, and then also things you can do proactively. So for sundowning, before dusk, or in your loved one's case, if you see a marker at a different time before that, you want to be really intentional about the environment. So if they live with you, if there are any professionals on the line who work in a community or work in home care, for example, you want to proactively modify the space around before we get to that time that your loved one demonstrates sundowning scenario. So number one, you want to just sort of make the space mellow. If the TV's been on, if news is on, you want to switch that off. Maybe put some light, comforting music, nothing loud, nothing too like jumpy and divey, but something that's going to be easing to your loved one. It could be a nature program. The caveat there is you want to be intentional about the nature program, because we've all seen, PBS Nature where the cheetah kills something, and that's not going to be edifying for your loved one. Minimize noise and activity. So if your loved one lives in their own home and you come and visit regularly in the day, or there's a few days a week you come and visit and spend the whole day with them. If you always leave at a certain time, sort of around when they sundown, maybe better to shift that to earlier or later. That way you're not causing sort of that, so that perceived internal trigger of change of day. Make sense? If you do work in a care community, or if anybody's on as a professional, you will want to minimize sort of the noise and the energy and the activity of shift change. So I know in communities, often there'll be sort of a transfer of how the day went to the new person. You want to be cautious how you do that and not sort of increase the energy and fear and anxiety of residents or participants. And then number 3 is turn on the lights, not super bright, not, like stadium lights, but something that is soothing. Close the curtains. And I want to tell you why specifically, like what scenario I'm thinking of there. For some of the memory loss or brain change or dementia journey, there can be an aspect of paranoia or hallucination. Especially with dementias around Parkinson's related dementia or Lewy body dementia, others. So shadows and reflections can really exacerbate that paranoia and hallucination. So we want to be proactive about that. If it were later in the day, I'm in front of this lovely window, it would be getting dark out. If I don't have the windows or the curtains closed, I look out, I see my reflection. If I'm in this journey and I'm sort of prone to paranoia and hallucination, I may see my reflection and think, oh, somebody's trying to get in, somebody's looking in at me, and I get all amped up. So these are just a handful of super practical, super manageable, proactive approaches you can take to help your loved one decrease their sundowning experience. Good. I want to reference the worksheet in case you are using it. So I talked a little bit about dementia and time and thinking of your person, your loved one. Is there a space that you think they are most often rooted? When we talk through sundowning, sleep disruption can dramatically impact or exacerbate. And I think, oh, good, perfect. So let's talk about sleep disruption. These slides came, and you'll see at the bottom, came from a webinar with Dr. Scullin. He is with Baylor University, and he runs the Sleep Neuroscience and Cognition Laboratory. If you ever get a chance, like if sleep is interesting to you, or if your loved one like really struggles with sundowning or with a sleep schedule, if you can find this recording, it was one of my favorites that I've ever listened to. So his webinar was Managing Sleep Disturbances in People with Dementia. He gave a ton of really practical tips. I want to highlight just a few. So one, if your loved one often has their sleep disrupted, and if you are with them in the same space, that's easier to know. If your loved one lives on their own, or they live with you and it's sort of down the hall and you don't know as much, this may be harder to see, but if you sort of see this increase in confusion later in the afternoon, it's probably worth checking into their sleep schedule. So one really simple thing you can do, I'm sure many of us on this call today will sometimes wake up in the night to go to the restroom, right? Yeah. So one thing we can do proactively that can be pretty simple for our loved one is install motion activated lights. And specifically what Dr. Scullin showed on the image was, if you think of putting your feet down as you're getting out of the bed, having it where the feet hit the floor, that activates the sensor. And where we're thinking is where I'm thinking is twofold. If our loved one has some memory loss, has some confusion, or has a diagnosis, and they're getting up at night, sort of the less sleep disruption and getting them sort of to the restroom, then back to bed without like a whole lot of waking up and sort of re-energizing is better. And also, if our loved one or a person is sort of in that space, You want to make sure they don't get confused and go to a different part of the house, or go to a closet thinking that's the restroom, or fall because they were kind of tired and groggy and disoriented. And so motion activated lights, good. Door alarms was mentioned by Dr. Scullin specifically around if our person gets up, gets easily disoriented, and is sort of trying all of the doors, or is in such a confused state that they attempt to leave the home and are trying doors. So I only say door alarms with a big asterisk beside it. It may be appropriate for your loved one, maybe not. And of course, in a care community, like the community Sandra supports, they already have many of these systems in place and already have 24-hour-a-day team members who are trained and sort of know how to handle these things. But this specifically in mind for if you have somebody at home or in their home. And the second thing he spent a lot of time on, at least that really resonated with me, was daytime naps. So for those of you whose loved one is in their home or has home care or is your home, I know from so many families I worked with over the years, I'm sure Sandra had the same experience. Some people with memory loss or a diagnosis will nap a whole lot during the day, or just a little. But the point here is we want to ask ourselves, take sort of a step back, look with fresh eyes, and say, are these naps benefiting my person? And I'm thinking about people I've known over the years that their loved ones sleep so long during the day or multiple naps during the day, and then really has a hard time at night or starts to get their whole day upended. And sort of when I would think to get up, they're like already having a nap. Or when I would think to be getting ready for bed, they're like, ooh, I'm ready. I'm ready to do a whole bunch of stuff. So naps are not wrong, but you want to think of, gosh, does it feel like my loved one takes a nap? It's sort of brief, they wake up refreshed, or gosh, is it like all day and then it seems to mess up the rest of their day? Those are good things to consider. If it's sort of getting to what I just said, messing up the rest of the day and night, you can do some clever things around sort of resetting their circadian rhythms. So my favorite thing that Dr. Scullin said was if there's sort of the nap time of the day and you're trying to lessen that, it's a great opportunity to get your person outside, so fresh air, sunlight. I know that's different for you and I where we live, but getting that fresh air, fresh energy, fresh light is going to help reset for tiredness in the evening. Sound good? And then he made a note, and I'm not going to emphasize it here, but it was super important, so I wanted to put it on the slide. If your person has sleep apnea, you definitely want to talk with a professional to get that under control or get support or get it managed, because that can really exacerbate a lot of the things we're talking about. Sandra, I just want to pause for a sec. Any chat questions, anything that I've not shared that I should?
No, not yet. I think it's super interesting, the sleep, the link of sleep, right? And yes. I think we're hearing even a lot more from people who don't have a dementia diagnosis, that they're having that brain fogness now because we're having so much insomnia. So for those of us who don't yet have a diagnosis of dementia, what can we do to prevent that?
Good, Sandra, specifically around sleep, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure, taking Ambien or anything like that, it's probably counteractive. So what can we do in a natural way to get that sleep?
Excellent, Sandra. So everybody on the call, I'm going to tell you some things you already know, but I promise it's really important and really effective. The first thing I want to say, sort of echoing Sandra's message, was remember years ago, totally outside of this world we're talking about, just about health in general. I was talking with a medical provider and she said, if you're not getting sleep, like there's only so much I can do. Like it is so critical to our system. There's been a ton of really interesting study around sleep is the time that our brain sort of resets. And it's when, and I know it's a silly way to put it, but it's the way like I've heard it explained by experts, It's when the brain like files away new information. It reminds me of, when we were all a bit younger and we would defragment our computer system. Like that's what the brain is doing in sleep. Like it's kind of ordering things. It's also flushing out toxins. That blows me away. So it is absolutely critical for all of us on the call, for our people, to, as much as we can, make sure we get good sleep. I did a bunch of research just recently for another presentation I give on maintaining your brain. And there's still no right perfect answer as far as amount of sleep. Some people can do with less, some need more. And everything you've heard about blue light and sort of getting into a practice of getting ready for bed, really critical. Not drinking liquids, up to a certain amount before bed so that you're not inadvertently forcing it to get up and wake up in the night to use the restroom. Dr. Scullin in particular gave some really good insights around melatonin. So I know a lot of us who are maybe more naturally focused will use that. And he gave some great insight about working with a professional to make sure you're using dosage and right amounts and right time. So it's not like when my mom or my aunt just said, oh, just take melatonin, you'll be better. You want to be strategic about that. I'm sure there's sites where you could get help as well. Is that helpful, Sandra? You think that's enough? Okay.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, good. Thank you. As you have other things, jump in. So we're still talking around sundowning. Let's think about our specific person. And at the Q&A, if you want to talk through something, of course, I want you to feel super welcome. But for all of us right now, I want you to think about your person. If they do have difficulty around dusk or around sort of that change of day, if they were a night nurse or worked at the plant at night or something like that, then their time of day is different than my time of day. So just take a moment. Think about your person and what you've seen at that dusk or change of day. And this is super important because each of our people, even though they have memory loss or have a certain diagnosis, doesn't mean their experience is the same. So I want you to think about 3 questions. 1, are they scared or more confused? Like what is the exhibiting trait? Fear, anxiety, I have to get home to be ready for the kids, or I have to make dinner, or I got to catch the train to get home. Like, what is that emotional state? And that'll give us a clue. Number two and number 3 are opposites, but both can be really helpful. Number 2 is what helps them. If they always tend to get kind of anxious a half hour before sunset, then if we go for a walk then, or we listen to their favorite music, or I ask my uncle to help me start cutting up vegetables or rinsing off the colander to help with dinner. What is that thing that sort of brings them calm? It's not necessarily when they are upset, because sometimes that's harder. It's sort of like breakthrough pain. It's harder to address once it's happening, easier to address just before. And then the opposite, what makes it worse? Maybe you've tried playing music and that didn't seem to help, or it was like too jumpy music, or you picked your favorite music and not their music. Think about what sort of exacerbates. And I'm curious if anybody has a reaction or something they've learned. Either way, write it down or make a note and we'll share at the end. So exit seeking, this is number 2, even though it says number 4. It's number 4 on the slides, number 2 out of our 3 big topics. Exit seeking is what used to be called in senior living as eloping. But of course that causes confusion because people will say, well, wait a minute, my mom's not going to get married. What are you talking about? So it means somebody is attempting to physically leave the space. And this can be really alarming for us as loved ones, caregivers, etc. people. So some possible causes. Our person may be more centered in an earlier time in their life. So I've sort of referenced that a few times about I need to be home because X, or I need to catch the train, I need to whatever. Could also be amplified because other people are leaving. So maybe you have home care staff in place. Maybe you have friends or neighbors that come visit and you sit on the porch together, or you're in the home, or whatever the case is. If they're sort of always leaving at a certain time, you may see that shift. If our person who is on this journey is maybe more easily confused or more easily influenced by sort of the energy and the action of others around them, when people leave your home, and if your loved one lives with you, then they might be thinking, oh, I should probably leave too. Especially if they are thinking of their home as a place from the past. And just as an aside, if our loved one is more rooted in the past, we don't necessarily know until we've done some discovery which home or which place they're most rooted in. It could be, when they worked on the farm as a kid and had to bring the cows in the evening. It could be that 1960s ranch that they lived in for the last, whatever math that would be, 40 years or something. We can better uncover what that place is with some good discovery questions. So we'll come to that.
Brenda, let me jump in before we lose track. So one of our attendees mentions, you and I have seen this often, when somebody lives at a community and the spouse that is healthy comes to visit, the spouse who has dementia gets angry when they leave for the evening. So I'm interested to hear your point of view, and I can also chime in.
Excellent, Sandra. Thank you for highlighting, and thank you, participant, for sharing. That is so common and can be, if I'm not projecting, if I'm empathizing, that can be so stressful on us because we just want to help our person or our loved one, and here, like, we need to go. We have other places we need to be, or things we need to do, or need self-care. And we, I think, have such anxiety and guilt when it's time to leave, or maybe frustration, like, oh, I've done so much and I absolutely need to, I've been here all day, like that's enough. So some good things to look at. And I know you said, my wife gets angry when I leave. So for all of us here, you want to think about, what is that emotion? Anger, fear, do they have a place they think they need to be? Like what is that? And we can jump off of that. So I'm going to start with some interventions that are not actually responding to your person. So when our attendees question this person's wife, we can look earlier into the day. So I think, and Sandra, if you've had other experiences, you let me know. For me, I've seen this more often an issue in communities when it's kind of that later in the afternoon, for all of these reasons we've talked about. So we may consider, is there a better time of day to visit? If I always visit in the afternoon, or I visit all day, and it's sort of like my work schedule, for lack of a better word, maybe I want to visit earlier in the day. Or maybe, depending on their state, maybe I want to visit like during dinner and after dinner. Think about other times that you can visit that may cause less disruption for your person. Or when you're visiting, always think of, when it's time to go, how you can make that as smooth as possible. So I know Sandra will have some great insights, though the two I want to emphasize are, maybe you sort of ease out as a favorite activity is occurring. So if your wife always loves the something program after lunch, you sort of ease out at that time where she's really engaged and happy and distracted, and you just go. None of us like to be said goodbye to. Like, if I love you, I just want you to stay the whole time. And so sort of easing away, especially if she has short-term memory loss, is going to be super smooth, because you haven't made sort of a, oh, bye, honey, I'll see you tomorrow. And then I'm like, oh, sort of inadvertently causing more anxiety. And then similar to activity is just meals. So often in care communities, meals are like a big affair. The food might be great. The neighbor that they always sit with at the table. I remember two gentlemen at my first community. They were the best buds. They didn't hang out too much outside of meals, but during meals, the one would tell jokes and the other one always just guffawed at them. It would have been such a great time if I was a loved one or relative to go during that time, because they're already absorbed, already having a great time. They're in the moment and joyous. Sandra, what would you like to share?
Well, I was going to say that was exactly what I responded here. So it could have been better coordinated. But I think there's, we as the healthier adult feel the need to be very honest and very transparent, right? And like you said, to say, honey, I'm going to leave, I'm going to go. And it creates unnecessary anxiety, as you said. And the whole point of joining their journey is less is more in this case. And my response to this gentleman was the same thing. Try to visit in the morning, right before a mealtime or right before an activity, and partner with the community staff and say, I'm going to be here for 30 minutes. Can you help me, like when I like do this or something, right? Or I'm going to say, I'm going to go to the restroom. And the feeling of abandonment that we think our loved one is going to have is going to be very short-lived. They will forget it and they will think of something else. And that's the benefit of living at a community, that there's other things to distract them and redirect them, right? And I think that's where we have to let, and it's hard for us because there's a lot of guilt, right? And I think that's where we need to learn to just let go of those moments and enjoy the time that we're visiting.
Beautifully put, Sandra. Excellent. Excellent. Keep your questions or comments coming in the chat. And of course, again, we'll have time at the end as well. So whichever you prefer. Great question. Thank you. And thanks for catching that, Sandra. So we talked through some exit seeking. I want to talk through two other things and a strategy. So the last two bullet points here are kind of opposite sides of the same coin. We may see more sort of more amplified confusion or anxiety or upset for two opposite reasons. Maybe our person is just so bored after the day. And I have more often seen this if they're living at home. And that is not to diminish home. I'm sure some of you have your people at home. It is simply what I've seen very often. So think of one family in particular. This was years ago. I was presenting a workshop for the Alzheimer's Association. And the person, I think an adult child, was saying, gosh, my parents, they have this regular routine. They sort of get up, they have breakfast, and they sit in the little, kitchenette dinette for a while. And then they go and sit on the porch. And then they make a sandwich for lunch. And then they both take a nap on the couch. And it was like, no criticism on this family, and you could see, of course, they're going to have some exacerbated symptoms or exacerbated expressions later in the day because they have gotten zero energy out throughout the day. Maybe the care partner spouse is just exhausted and is elated for those naps. And in the meantime, their person is just like, has not gotten a single moment sort of get that energy out, and it's just building. So that's one thing. And I think that's something that we don't consider often enough. And then the other part is, gosh, what is this space like? Is it loud? There's a big bustle? Are we kind of too crammed in together? Like, is it so amplifying that is transferred now to me and I'm all amped up? Let's see. Oh, good. I'm super excited about this next. So this is one of my favorite dementia specialists. And I want to say she's in her late 90s now. Her name is Naomi Feil. And if you're listening and not watching, it's F like Frank, E-I-L. And she created the validation method. If I remember correctly, she and her family escaped Nazi Germany when she was super young. And then her dad, I think, was an administrator of a care home, and her mom did something associated with it. I think she was the social worker. And so Naomi grew up in a care community with seniors and really had this transformational view of how to engage with people in their aged years, people with dementia, etc. And she developed this method called validation. We've sort of alluded to it a few times, but I really just want to spell it out here because it can be hard to practice, but really transformational with your person. And this is basically to say, engage with your loved one according to their perspective. So we're kind of back to the empathy discussion, but a little bit differently. And this video clip in particular is incredible. And it's Naomi Feil and Ms. Wilson, and you would find it on any like YouTube, etc. But Naomi's method, actually, let me go back just a second. Naomi's method is engage with your person as if their perspective is real and correct, because to them it is. It's not like a lying or deception, like I'm in my world, she's in her world, I'm going to engage with her as if her world is correct. And where I think we sometimes fear validation is just like before when we talked about mirroring emotions. Like, oh my gosh, if my person thinks she is younger and is looking for her mom and is getting really anxious, I might be afraid to sort of join her in that space because what if I make her more upset? But this is the part I like the most about Naomi. If we're thinking, if our loved one is maybe later, maybe in the middle of their journey, especially with dementia, they may have limited vocabulary and word choice and sort of processing ability. So I think of a resident I knew when Sandra and I worked together years and years and years ago. And this resident was probably in her 90s, and I knocked on her door, came in her apartment. This was in, Seattle in the winters. It's gray and dark and rainy, and her apartment was a little dim, like just one light in the corner, and she just seemed so down. I walked up to her and said, oh my gosh, what's going on? And she said, I need my mom. And I will tell you, this was a long time ago, and I was a literalist. I thought she really needed her mom. If I would approach that today, I would say, like Naomi teaches us, tell me about your mom. What is she like? And what do you like about her? And no matter where this resident or your person is at in their journey, if they're quote unquote nonverbal, or their speech is garbled, or they can't say a whole sentence, that's okay, because they can still give us some clues of where they are emotionally at. So it may not be that the resident I'm referencing was actually looking for her mom. I look at the setting, I still remember it in my mind's eye, the setting of the apartment. It was a gray, rainy Seattle winter. It was chilly outside. Her apartment was dim. She just looked kind of lost. And I am certain today that she was saying, I need my mom, as a way to say, I'm lonely, I'm scared, I'm unsure, I need help. Just because our loved one says these words doesn't necessarily mean those exact words. It may just be the words that they have at their disposal that they're able to say at the time. So Naomi's all about like really engaging, not lying, engaging and asking great questions. And like, for example, Ms. Wilson is apparently nonverbal, and then some magical thing happens that I won't spoil. So validation is not lying. And there are some people in senior care and loved ones, etc., who will use lying. And that is definitely an option. There's a school of practice. I'm not as crazy about it. Because if you attempt to deceive, they may sense it. You may actually break a connection. They may know that they really are scared, but they're just using the words that they have. So validation, I think, is incredible and transformative. Vanessa in the chat says, for mirroring emotions and having empathy, how do you navigate a loved one oh, interesting, Vanessa. A loved one spontaneously crying. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Sandra. Oh, no, okay. Oops, oh gosh.
I was just updating, but go ahead.
Okay, perfect.
Did it disappear for you? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I found it. Nothing to be sorry for. Okay, Vanessa says, how would you navigate a loved one spontaneously crying? How do you get through or past that emotion with them when they don't know why they're feeling this way? That is such a good question, Vanessa. I'm really glad you asked. I'm going to share, and then Sandra, of course, throughout, Sandra, you share what you think is helpful. Vanessa, there is a particular, so, and you all hear my language has been, memory loss or dementia or specific diagnosis, because I know some of us, we don't know where a loved one is at. We just know there's some issue going on. So I'm trying to be really open and not put up a bridge for anybody, or I guess not put up a wall for anybody. If your loved one is just at the space where they have some memory loss, some sort of what feel like odd emotional reactions to you, I want you to feel connected and empowered in the space. So Vanessa, the reason I referenced a specific dimension, I'm blanking right now which one, but that sort of dramatic, like you said, spontaneous burst of emotion and crying can be really common. And so the first thing I want to suggest, and you all notice, I never give like a clear one answer, like, oh, do this will work every time. Because we have some things that we know generally work, but we also know every person is different. So Vanessa, I want you to think about if you notice any patterns. Is it a certain time of day? Does the environment seem like affecting? Is it chilly? Like, where is your person at in that moment? And do you see any trends? That can give us a clue. Are there, and sometimes if we're asking for trends and that feels hard, and ask for the opposite. Like, is there a time when it doesn't happen? Sometimes that's helpful. So I am actually at a loss of what to tell you next as far as that spontaneous aspect, other than if we start to see trends. Sandra, is there anything you want to share?
For me, as I'm seeing validation right in there, I think no different than the rest of us, right? When there is a feeling, and in this case, your person is unable to express why they're feeling that way. I think just validating, saying, I am sorry that you're sad, and I'm sorry that you feel this way. Would it help if we go for a walk? Can we go get some fresh air? Let's go get some ice cream or something, right? So that would be my approach, just validating and trying, because if we sit there trying to figure out sometimes, to ask them, right? But you're right, sometimes our loved ones can be overwhelmed by whatever is happening, whether it's maybe there's all of a sudden somebody else nearby who is yelling or acting out, and they're feeling fear. And at that point, it may be more beneficial to walk and go and be in a more private place, right? Yeah. That would be my only comment.
Good, Sandra. You've also reminded me, Vanessa, just that act of being together can sometimes be super powerful. So maybe if with your loved one, maybe depending if they're standing or sitting or in their wheelchair, maybe just kind of link arms and say, oh my God, it feels like you're so sad. And you sort of give these affirming messages, and also the implication that you're there. And you say, I'm going to sit with you, especially if it's a scenario like Sandra, or not like Sandra described, where there isn't like this obvious or possible trigger going on, but just really centering with them can be super powerful. Thank you for asking, Vanessa. Okay, So we also have our worksheet, and we've sort of encouraged you to think through some ways that you might practice Naomi Files method or other trends you're seeing in your loved one. So I remind you again, our joining techniques, engage, mirror, empathy, and then can you tell me, can you show me? Super effective. I'm going to skip this page. This is sort of another sort of pondering exercise because I want to make sure you have time for questions and comments. So last part is wandering. This may sound like exit seeking, and sometimes they're lumped together. They really have two distinct, two different roots. So exit seeking is when your person literally is trying to exit the home, the backyard, the community, the adult day program, etc. If they're living with you instead of their previous home, etc. Wandering is different. So wandering, you think of what that word means, sort of ambling along. Wandering is what we'll see sometimes in loved ones where they just gotta go at certain times of the day or all day. And I want to say here, if they're in a smaller space, like a home, sometimes the wandering is more, can also transition into anxiety, frustration, exit seeking, because they don't have like enough space to ramble. So just like we did with some of the other exercises, some things you want to, and I love this phrase, follow your curiosity. Even if you're in the depths of it, that is a good path to take because it can help you sort of see new things and not be so weighed down by the scenario. So look for patterns. Is it all day? Is it in the afternoon? Is it after dinner? Like what, when, always what? What happens when they come to an end? So a locked door, like in my house right here, the hallway ends right there. Do they get anxious? Do they just sort of turn around and keep going? Like what's that? What do they do with that? And then lastly, what happens if you ambulate with them? So, and sometimes we'll just use the term walk, but maybe your person is in a wheelchair and they sort of shuffle with their feet, or they have their walker, or they whatever. What happens if you join them? So we're sort of back to that joining concept. You can see how it all flows together. If you join them, they seem pleased. Sometimes this ambulating is just a need to go, and that can be totally okay. And that's something I really want to root here. There's some things that may be confusing to us or alarming, but can be totally fine for our person. And so if there's somebody who wanders, just sort of take a look back and join them, see what that does. That's something if somebody wanders, I love care communities, especially in the case of wandering. So many will have like a clever, where there's like really no end, or they do a really proactive job about helping somebody wander where it can just sort of go and be soothing, or they wander with them. It can be just a really lovely aspect. So, whoops, I didn't mean to click that. Sandra, anything, oops, I don't know how to go back. There we go. Sandra, anything you want to say about wandering?
No, I think, wandering is not necessarily bad. I think a lot of the times, as you were identifying earlier, is making sure that we keep them stimulated, that there's enough activities and, movement during the day, vitality, so that they don't feel that need. Somebody said, I joined her wander, and we say we're going to wander while we wander, and we walk the halls. I love that. And it's a great idea, right? It's like, hey, let's see what we discover. And, kind of, it's a little bit of a silly comparison, but, during the pandemic, people would put hearts or teddy bears in their windows. So it's a good idea to just go on the hunt for something, right? It's like, if you're in a neighborhood and you're not at a community, let's see if we see any teddy bears. So as we walk around, let's count how many we find. But yeah, I love that, Kristen. Thanks for that feedback.
That's beautiful, Kristen. Oh, and thank you, Sandra. Okay, some wrap up and questions. So we talked about joining, adjusting home environment proactively, looking for patterns, and practicing validation. I want to open it up, and Sandra, I also want to make sure you have time to share about the services GenCare offers and just your expertise in what you know.
Thank you, Brenda. Well, as Brenda and I had alluded before, we had the opportunity to work at the beginning of our senior living careers 12 and 13 years ago together. And we both have taken a little bit different paths, but what we are both very passionate about is advocating for seniors. During my work now with GenCare, what I love is the focus that there is for aging well. And I think very often in senior living, providers take memory care as a way to retain their staff rather than making it a priority. And our residents with memory care really take priority in so many ways, from the nutrition that we are giving them and making sure that they are having anti-inflammatory menu items to help them. While we can prevent the disease once somebody has the diagnosis, we can definitely try to minimize it. Falls is the number one reason why seniors go to the hospital, and nobody can prevent falls, but we can also minimize it by providing fitness and vitality programs. Somebody just mentioned my mom has a few childhood memories of incidences between herself and her sister. That is the first thing that comes to mind about her sister, and from that, she thinks her sister did not like her. That's very sad. That is not the case in that's not the case in adult years. And we as kids only remember the laughter between them. I have shown her pictures of the two of them laughing together and with the kids, but it does not change the perception that her sister did not like her. Her sister passed away over 20 years ago. Is there a way to change that perception?
Oh, Ralph, what a powerful story. I'm swept up in it. Sandra, do you mind if I answer?
Go ahead.
Okay. Ralph, I love what you're sharing. So I'm curious of a couple things. And I think about Naomi Feil she has, I think, a really powerful belief. And whether or not you or I agree, that's totally okay. But her belief is that when somebody has dementia in particular, there's sort of a freeing. Of course, the frontal lobe is often affected, and that's our executive center. And it can be a time where our person or our loved one can kind of process some stuff or let something go or verbalize what they have held on to forever. So I think of, and I think of your mom and how she holds on to this belief of not being liked. And I hear you on wanting to sort of overcome that. I am curious if you may benefit, instead of trying to show her maybe pictures and point them out as her and her sister, just dig deeper, try to understand where she's at or what she thinks of her sister, and just do some discovery. And I'm presuming from how you described it that she is able to verbally communicate either clearly or relatively. And I may just be curious to see if that helps her to let go of something or may work through something. The sort of a super general statement we often make is, if it's not making somebody sad, if it's not harming, just let it go. Don't try to change it. But I'm really curious if there's something your mom wants to sort of work through, and that might be an amazing time for her.
Brenda, we have one more question. I keep in touch weekly with my grandma who has mid to late stage dementia by calling her on FaceTime, but she has a hard time holding a conversation. Any ideas for how can I still engage with her on the phone when there is a lack of dialogue and I become lost for words?
Good. So good. What a great question. So the person who just asked, one, I love that you keep in touch regularly with their grandma. I mean, that just warms my heart right there. So there's a few things that we can do, depending on where she is and if she has somebody with her, whether it's in a community or her home or home care, whatever her scenario is. If there's somebody around who can support, that might help. Somebody in my life, when we're on FaceTime, and if you can see me, it goes like this, and the next thing I know, she's doing this. And sometimes I remind her because I know she's not getting the benefit of seeing my expression, and other times I just let it go if it's going fine. So, so I'm curious if there's a person around who can sort of help keep her seeing you on the screen. But I'm also curious if she's in a place where sort of that conversational visit is maybe less within her grasp. And if that's the case, I wonder if you pivot to some other things. So for example, if she's a person of faith, you know, you could read her favorite mantra, like for my mother-in-law, or the rosary for my mom's friend, or like whatever their faith practice is, you could read that to them. That can be really grounding. And there's something we don't have time to discuss, but related to sort of patterned speech and music that is stored in a different place of the brain than language. And so it remains often very late into the dementia journey. So what I want to emphasize here is that is a tool, that's a path that remains that you can take to stay connected with her. You can do other things together, depending on how big her screen is. You might like show photos like, oh my gosh, I saw this. Like, what do you think? And what's key here, especially where you described her stage as, we don't want to quiz her. We don't want to say, oh my gosh, this is grandma, but I don't, or this is your mom, and I don't know who it is next to her, or this is your wedding. But we just want to say like, hey, what do you, oh my gosh, this hat is amazing. See all these ladies have hats? And then like just whatever she wants to respond or observe. There's so many, this is like something I'm super passionate about. So many ways that we can engage and connect and communicate in the later part of the disease journey that sometimes just don't come to us as options. I know for me and a lot of people I've known, the first thought is, well, I'm communicating if I'm having a conversation, but there's so much more we can do. And it's a little bit harder if we're remote, but we can totally do it. I'm really glad you asked.
Well, we are right on time, Brenda, but I'm so appreciative of having you here. It will not be the last time. Thank you to everyone who joined. We will share the recording by tomorrow, and we'll send you also a copy of the notes that Brenda so kindly shared with us, as well as some resources. And if you have any questions, please let us know. My email is scook@gencare-inc.com. And you can also reach to any of your local Gen Care communities. The maps of those communities are in the chat box. And we look forward to seeing you again soon, Brenda.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day.